All right, today we are diving into one of the most terrifying and, let's be honest, one of the most effective military forces in all of human history. We're going to peel back the layers of myth and legend to really get at the systematic, calculated ruthlessness that just fueled the Mongol Empire's unbelievable success. So let's just start with the central question, because it's almost unbelievable when you think about it. How on earth does a group of about 1 million people from the incredibly harsh Eurasian steppe go on to conquer the largest single land empire the world has ever seen? It seems impossible. And here's the answer. This wasn't just random, mindless savagery. No, it was a system. For the Mongols, war wasn't about honor or some kind of glorious combat. It was a brutal equation of efficiency. They fought to win, and they fought to win at any cost, using every single tool they had, especially the minds of their enemies. So here's our game plan for breaking down their methods. First, we're going to shatter that myth of the disorganized barbarian. Then we'll get right into their brilliant, deadly dissection on the battlefield. We'll also see how they weaponized fear itself, how they conquered nature, and finally, we'll look at the staggering legacy they left behind. Okay, first things first, we have got to correct a huge misconception. You know that idea of the mindless savage horde? It's one of the biggest understatements in all of history. To the great settled civilizations of the time, we're talking China, Persia, Europe, the steppe was just this harsh, empty wasteland. And they saw the nomads who lived there as uncivilized, chaotic, really nothing more than a nuisance. And boy, was that a fatal miscalculation. And this, right here, this gets to the absolute heart of their philosophy. Mongol warfare was stripped of all ego, of all chivalry. See, they were forged in a land where just surviving was a daily calculation. So they saw war as a problem to be solved with maximum efficiency and, crucially, with minimum Mongol casualties. Pride meant absolutely nothing, only total victory mattered. So how did this cold, hard philosophy actually work on the battlefield? Well, it translated into pure, brilliant deception, using one of the most terrifying tactics ever conceived. It was called the Mangudai. Now think about it. In most armies, a retreat means you're beaten, that morale has completely shattered. The Mongols took that assumption and weaponized it. They practiced turning and fleeing with such incredible discipline that it became the perfect bait for a deadly trap. And they perfected this at the Battle of the Kalka River. You had this big coalition of heavily armored Rus princes, and they see this small Mongol force charge, and then immediately break and run. Smelling an easy victory, the Rus army gives chase for 9 straight days, getting more and more exhausted and disorganized. And then, the trap sprung. The fleeing Mongols wheeled around in perfect unison, while fresh, hidden reserves crashed into the enemy's flanks. It wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. And what happened next shows you just how brutally pragmatic they were. After the battle, the captured Rus princes were laid on the ground. A wooden platform was built right on top of them, and the Mongols held their victory feast on that platform, crushing them to death. So why do that? Because spilling royal blood on the earth was a taboo, so they found a way around it. Utterly, utterly ruthless. But, for all their genius on the battlefield, the Mongols' most powerful weapon wasn't the bow or the horse. It was terror. Pure terror. They gave every single city a simple, terrifying choice. A binary option. No negotiation. You could open your gates, surrender, and live. You'd be taxed, sure, but you'd live. Or you could resist. And if you resisted, you would face total, complete extermination. And this wasn't some idle threat. It was a brutally consistent promise. And they made terrifying examples of anyone who defied them. When the governor of a city called Otrar executed Mongol merchants just to steal their silver, Genghis Khan's revenge was a masterclass in psychological warfare. To mock the governor's greed, they captured him and poured molten silver into his eyes and ears. A message was sent to the entire world. And get this was all part of the plan. After annihilating a city, they would intentionally let a few survivors escape. These traumatized refugees would flee to the next city down the road, carrying these horrific stories that just destroyed the will to fight before the Mongol army even showed up. During a siege, they used a tactic of unimaginable cruelty called the Karash. They'd round up local peasants, farmers, anyone they could find, and force them to the front lines.
They'd make them fill moats with their bodies and absorb the enemy's arrows. So the defenders on the walls were faced with this horrific choice: kill their own people or surrender their city. It was psychologically devastating.
The Mongols didn't just conquer people, they conquered the environment itself, turning what other armies saw as a massive obstacle into a decisive advantage. For pretty much every other army at the time, winter meant the fighting stopped. You'd hunker down in your fort and wait for the spring thaw. While the Mongols, they did the exact opposite. They were used to the brutal cold of their homeland, so they launched their main invasions in the dead of winter. And it all came down to this simple, brilliant shift in perspective. European armies saw a frozen river and thought, well, that's an impassable barrier. The Mongols saw a wide, flat, perfect road for their cavalry to move at incredible speeds, completely bypassing fortifications and striking deep into enemy territory. I mean, they could cover up to 60 miles a day in freezing temperatures. That speed was just incomprehensible to their enemies. They struck with the speed and shock of a blizzard, appearing exactly where they were least expected. So you take this combination of tactical genius, psychological warfare, and environmental mastery, and it left a scar on the world that you can still feel today. The sack of Baghdad in 1258, it's probably the peak of their destructive power. At the time, Baghdad was the center of the entire Islamic world. The Mongols destroyed the House of Wisdom, which was the greatest library on earth. They threw so many books into the river that the water was said to have run black with ink before it turned red with the blood of the city's scholars. The sheer scale of it all is almost impossible to wrap your head around. An estimated 10% of the entire world's population was killed. Entire cultures were just wiped out. Ancient knowledge lost forever. They systematically destroyed irrigation systems in places like Persia, causing famines that lasted for generations. And yet, here is the great paradox in all of this. This campaign of total terror created something called the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. Because their rule was so absolute and their punishment for any kind of dissent was so swift, their vast empire actually became incredibly safe. And for about a century, trade and ideas flowed freely along the Silk Road like never before. Which leaves us with a really deeply unsettling question. The Mongol war machine was built on a foundation of calculated destruction and just unimaginable cruelty. But it also forcibly connected East and West, creating a brand new world. So, does a century of peace and trade justify the rivers of blood it cost to achieve it? That's something history leaves for us to ponder.
Please like and subscribe.